Right, let's lower the flag and turn our attentions to the other side of the Atlantic and look at the USA market. Cutting straight to the main facts and figures about the market. In 2014, the market welcomed about 23.3 million visitors. This year, it's anticipated to welcome about 26 million. That's a substantial increase of about 9% year on year. That's the forecast according to Oxford Economics. Now, if you look at that chart up on the screen, there's no doubt that that trend is almost something of a Lazarus-style revival against what was happening in the market the previous 10 years. Because during the first 10 years of the current century, it's fair to say that the US market pretty well flatlined. It stagnated. Now, hypersensitive to world events, a few ups and downs, but by the end of the decade, the US market was no larger than it was at the beginning. Now, this was at a time when other overseas origin markets were increasing at quite a rate. So we saw threefold growth from China, we saw threefold growth from Russia, we saw twofold growth from India, from Brazil. Even USA's neighbors, Canada and Mexico, they grew by about 50% in that same period. So what that meant was that the US lost market share over that first 10 years. It lost share from about 5.5%, finished the 10-year period at about 4.8%. So in the last 5 years, we have seen this real resurrection in the USA market. It's actually grown by about 25%, about 6 million more overnight arrivals into Europe. And just to put that 6 million into context, because that's quite a big, hairy number, if we bear in mind that the UK welcomes about 2.5 million US arrivals a year, so that gives you some idea of the scale of that 6 million incremental arrivals. So what's been driving it? Well, in the, I guess the immortal words of President Clinton, it's the economy, stupid. And of course, the economy is playing out in two fundamental ways in terms of boosting demand from the USA. There is no doubt that the consumer economy itself, and this is the main driver of GDP growth in the USA at the moment. Consumer spending is about 70% of US GDP. That has been growing very rapidly. There is more confidence amongst consumers, mainly a reaction to several factors. Increasing numbers of jobs, employment prospects are even better because the unemployment rate has come down. But fundamentally, the thing that's really putting money back into consumers' pockets is the sliding price of gas, or petrol, as we like to call it over here. 18 months ago, the price of a gallon of petrol was about $4. Now, you guys can probably tell me more about this than I know. But as at yesterday, you could buy a gallon of gas in Chicago for $2.03. So a substantial reduction in the price of gas, which is putting more money into consumers' pockets. And those are good conditions for priming more demand for travel and tourism. It builds discretionary expenditure when consumers have more money in their pockets, and that hopefully translates through to more demand for travel and tourism products. And of course, at the same time, the other expression of the strength in the US economy is the exchange rate. 18 months ago, a euro cost about $1.38. A year later, it cost $1.06, a 30% reduction in the cost of euros for US travelers. So not surprisingly, by any stretch of the imagination, a currency change of that sort of magnitude is clearly going to have a very positive impact on travel flows to Europe. So let's have a look at how the US footprint plays out in Europe. I guess as in most markets, it's the main European tourism economies that benefit the most. So in this instance, Western Europe and Northern Europe, between them, account for about 60%. And they're anchored by the tourism economies of France and Germany in Western Europe, by the UK in Northern Europe, and also Southern Europe, where Italy is the big hitter, and also Spain to a lesser extent. So those five key tourism economies actually account for about 55% of all US arrivals into Europe. Now, of course, city tourism is a very important product within the US portfolio. We know that there is intense rivalry among US cities in terms of bragging rights, in terms of most visitors, most US visitors. So if we defer to hotels.com, the pecking order of main European cities, in a sense, they won't come as a huge surprise. It's London, it's Paris, it's Rome, Barcelona, Amsterdam, Florence, Venice, Madrid, and Dublin. But there's no doubt that US visitors are beginning to go further afield. And on this particular theme, it's interesting to note just how important US visitors are to the river cruising market. Viking reckoned that about 500,000 US visitors would be taking to the waterways of Europe this year, which is about a 7-fold increase on the number that were river cruising in the year 2000. And that's clearly benefiting some of the secondary towns and cities within the European hinterland, which are located on Europeans' waterways. And we also know that looking at some of the figures produced by ETC in their regular quarterly bulletin, that some of the fringe and emerging tourism destinations of Europe around the Baltics, the Balkans, the Adriatic, are also beginning to feel the impact of larger numbers of US visitors. So countries like Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Montenegro, they've all been witnessing increases of the order between 25 and 50% in overnight arrivals in the first few months of this year. So the American footprint is getting further afield. And looking at that chart up there, you can see that the highest rate of growth is actually going to be expressed more in Central and Eastern Europe and also in Southern Europe as well, where there are a lot of these fledgling consumer economies. So, looking at the future and how things are going to play out over the next 5 years, clearly the big challenge Europe has in terms of the US outbound market is maintaining and sustaining its share. Again, if we go back to the first 10 years of the century, Europe lost share against other destinations worldwide. For instance, regions such as the Caribbean came on very strongly, the Middle East, and of course Asia Pacific. But certainly in terms of the figures we're seeing from Oxford Economics, in terms of arrivals into Europe, and also outbound traffic from USA, I think we can feel fairly confident that over the next 5 years, Europe will probably hold its own in terms of market share. So that over the next 5 years, we're looking at European arrivals growth in the order of about 25%. So that's about 4.5% per annum. US outbound will probably grow at about 22, 23%. So you can see arrivals into Europe are slightly outperforming the growth in US outbound. So the picture is looking pretty positive. But I think we should bear in mind one quite important factor, because of course the demographic makeup of the US is changing in a couple of fundamental ways. If we look at the makeup of the US population, about 35% of the population identify themselves as Asian, Hispanic, or Black American. Now, if we look at how the market to Europe has progressed over the years, clearly a lot of the market has resided around those strong connections with Europe, be they ancestral, cultural, economic, commercial, political, and whatever. Now, clearly, with larger numbers of immigrant population in the USA, in a sense, their perspective is no longer Europe. They're looking to other areas, the countries of their birthright. So I think the big challenge Europe has in this changing population mix is retaining its relevance and its significance among this quite profound population change. So I think that's all I need to say in terms of an introduction. So hand over to the panel.
Thanks very much. All right, thanks, Paul. Now, I will briefly introduce the three panel members and then ask them each to comment a little. Chris Pomeroy, who was born in Canada but has lived elsewhere and now lives in Spain, has experience in international tourism, tourism marketing, which spans, as it says here, 3 decades and 4 continents.
I started very young.
I was going to say better than four decades and 3 continents. Exactly. I was thinking. Now based in Madrid, he's designed successful communications and promotional strategies in Europe for 50 leading travel brands and in a number of countries. In February this year, he joined the team of MMGY Global, a leading integrated tourism marketing agency in the US. Jennifer Tombor is president of Tauk. I'm bound to get that, 50-50. The US-based tour operator serving all 7 continents with more than 140 guided travel experiences and events for the culturally curious traveller on land, small ship and river cruises, elegantly put. Prior to Tauk, she was a group account director with the advertising firm Leo Burnett in Taipei in Taiwan, worked for the Coca-Cola company in Atlanta, and was a consultant with the Monitor Company. And then, last but not least, Luca Romozzi, who is a member of the Expedia Inc. team for more than 8 years and has had various roles within Expedia Media Solutions, currently focused on growing Expedia Media Solutions' display advertising business with destinations, marketing organizations, hotels, airline clients in, well, Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and India. So that's not everything I have written about them all, but suffice to say, I think that's just about enough.
More than you
Right.
need, actually.
Okay, now, would you like to go first, Jennifer?
Sure,
Go on.
happy to. I sort of start off with Gideon and tend to agree that the market share question, at least in my view, is less of a concern generally for Europeans in terms of the American traffic into this wonderful, wonderful continent. And that's mainly because that, one, the numbers that Paul just shared, but also you have to remember, we love you all as much as we love Canadians who are right next door. When you look at the actual overall leisure travel, about 12 million travelers on a leisure basis came into Europe last year, pretty much the same into Canada, and we're already up nearly 6% this year. You also have to remember that about a year ago at this time, there was a lot going on in the world in terms of from a media perspective in the US with the ISIS beheadings that were going on of American citizens. We had the Ebola outbreak, which says, what does that have to do with Europe? Well, people were actually calling saying, I'm not going to travel on my Christmas river cruise because I'm afraid I'm going to catch Ebola on the air. So this is true. These were actually some of the calls that we were listening in on, which were just stunning. So we've already seen year over year increases in our growth anywhere between 10 and 30%, depending upon our brand, into Europe. And already, I know for 2015, the numbers suggest that the leisure travel is going to be up nearly 6%. So we see a pretty rosy future, not only because the numbers played out, but because of what the insights are about the brand. I mean, Europe still is such an evocative, aspirational destination for Americans. You all have a lovely lifestyle, the cafes, the sort of leisurely the leisurely meals sound just absolutely enticing to an American, let me tell you. Right now, actually. But there's so much romanticism about the place. It's also really considered still quite innovative. I mean, you know, it was with the Bond film coming out just now, you know, Europe is very much in the headlines. You know, what Kate wore to the premiere is all over the headlines, which frankly, does knock off the migrant issue, which was on the headline. So, you know, there's a lot of the pop culture that plays out that tends to downplay the anxiety about travel to Europe, which I'll come back to in just a second. But there's also innovation in terms of the way that folks are traveling. And one thing I don't hear the tourist boards talking about, but that is a brand Europe opportunity, is the river cruise. And you know, the Henry James Grand European Tour doesn't really exist anymore, in the exception of the river cruise space, when you're going from Amsterdam to the Black Sea, or if you're a family and you want to give your children that educational experience, which is the other third real appeal, I think, from a brand perspective, which is the education value. The passport is the new diploma, as we say, particularly on family travel. We've seen a huge growth in that as well. And last, I would just say, in addition to the economic factors that Paul pointed out, the fact that, as I mentioned, that there has been peace relatively in the world is huge. I mean, we saw our bookings fall off a bit more dramatic than what Gideon suggested earlier, of about, in the first 6 weeks of this year, our bookings were down about 25% into Europe because of the anxiety of traveling here and were you going to be safe? And that remains a huge concern. So while there's things like Downton Abbey that Viking is very heavily promoting on, that create that great draw and appeal, that security question is still very much forefront in the American mind. And I know that that isn't the case, that level of extremity is not as extreme as it is here in Europe. And we see that quite a lot. Every time I bring up that issue of security, I get sort of the eye roll. But it is a factor of life in the United States, and it's something that certainly is on everyone's radar screen.
Well, you've given for me certainly the Downton Abbey to ISIS spectre, which I'm going to treasure for some times to come as a sort of attractor, disincentive. That's excellent. Right, very good. Which of you would like to go next? Why don't we just go?
Go, Greece. Go this way.
Okay.
I'd like to start by saying it's the first, and I hope my father's not watching this on the internet, probably not. And I should think, last time I will be in London apologising for not being American. Sorry, guys, but I'm not American. I do work for an American company, which incidentally is one of these guys that charge millions of dollars for coming up with brands for countries.
They do or they don't?
We wish we would.
Oh,
but,
right. Okay, well,
no, we do. It is a tourism marketing agency. And one of the interesting things, I think, of the agency is that we have everything we do is based on research, which I think is a little different to a lot of companies in the industry in Europe, and I'm a European, obviously, is the importance placed on that research. We do a thing so that some of the figures, and you'll have to forgive me if I keep consulting my iPad because I'm an intermediary in the travel and tourism industry. The information that we're getting comes from this portraited American traveler research, which we've been doing for 25 years now, which is basically surveying. It's a very long, in-depth survey to 3,000 tourists of household income over $50,000 about their perceptions of different destinations. And from there, we take a subset of European. The other thing I'd like to say is that I'm delighted about how positive this has been. I'm enjoying this much more than I thought I would. Because when I read the press release about it, it was all, and I actually built my answers around what I thought was going to be a quick Q&A, which was things like, is Europe being outstripped by the competition? What can we do to change perception, et cetera, where according to our figures in the Portrait of an American Traveller, Europe is still by far and away the number one. It has, from the last 2 years, intention to travel to Europe when people asked. 3 years ago, people said, 58% of people said that they plan to travel to Europe in the next 2 years. This year, 50%, yes, gone down a little bit. But after Caribbean has gone down by 14%, Canada has stayed more or less the same. Then next is Australia and New Zealand, which has gone from 40% to 20% in intention to travel. So we're doing very well as far as the top ranking. We're still there, and I think we're differentiating ourselves.
Where's gone the other way, as a matter of interest?
None.
None,
as far as intention to travel. It's all down slightly, so there we go, despite the market. And then on the sheer volume numbers, I'm based in Madrid. The Spanish government is claiming 22% increase, I think, of American travel so far this year. And in the month of June specifically, there was a 40% increase. Obviously, a lot to do with the dollar, a lot to do with North Africa, et cetera, and different areas, and Southern Europe being considered perceived safe and 30% cheaper than it was this time last year. So figure-wise, it's going well. Where I'd like to bring the conversation a little bit was the hashtag, which was hashtag Brand Europe, I think. And I think that's maybe where Europe could improve a little bit with that branding. And it's, again, interesting that I'm representing an American company, being a Brit living in Spain, because we've had Scotland wanting to be independent, and we've got Barcelona wanting to be independent. We've said 40 different people are going to China to present Europe as a destination. It's the Europeans that need to believe first in a brand Europe, and that's a question. It's a lot easier for a North American to understand the concept of Europe as a brand, brand Europe. And so where the perception that we've been talking about, is there a change in perception about Europe in the American traveller? I would say no. I'd say the attributes of Europe are very well known to the North American traveller. But where there is a change is in the perception of what makes an appealing holiday, which is no longer attribution-based. We're not talking about going and seeing Big Ben anymore. So the new travelers, and particularly these second-generation Latins and Chinese and from all different areas, are not necessarily coming to see physical attributes. They're looking for an experience. And that, I think, is where Europe has to be very, very careful, because other regions, such as South America particularly, Asia, if you say wine in North America, you might even think of Chile before you think of Spain or France. Why? Because Chile have got the wine promotion as a core of their, and they've got a message and they're promoting. The Peruvians are doing food. Costa Rica's doing soft adventure. So if these are the things that people are looking for in vacations, why are we still talking about cities necessarily? And rather than what you can do and what you can experience in those cities. So I think that's kind of important. I'll leave on there because I can go on for hours.
Okay, well, I'll give you a chance to go on for a bit longer in a moment.
No. Last session.
Luca.
So, I mean, if you need to apologize, I don't know what I need to do because I'm an Italian talking about the Americans, but I've been working for Expedia for 8 years. So I won't try my American accent, I'll keep my Italian one, but what I want to highlight is mainly what has been said before about the demand that is going a little bit down, but I feel that it's normal when you represent a big share of the second biggest travel market in the world. So I feel that Brand Europe shouldn't be too worried about maybe the demand of the overall. However, what we need to focus is on strategies, different strategies of maintaining the share. So make sure that obviously we are, so when I say we as a brand Europe, we can keep the right share for our region, and then understanding also where can be the new business. So that's the two areas that I would say as a strategy we should focus on the discussion. And so obviously has been said also about the importance of the economy. So US travelers are gaining more confidence as the economy is more stable. And this is has a direct impact on the leisure travel. So right now, there is only a huge opportunity on the US traveler because obviously the currency is very strong. It's cheaper than ever coming to Europe. And so, and also you can see that the growth is on the long haul destination. So people are traveling more long haul and they stay longer. So despite the fact that demand might be slightly slower than before, I feel there are some areas where we can work. So what I want to point out, one can be the millennials as a demographic. This is, I feel, that is more the new business. And because it's the new business, it's a little bit harder. So we need to make sure to have a right strategy. And the reason why those millennials are actually harder is because the world is more accessible for them. So for them, choosing Chile or choosing Italy, can be quite similar. So that's where I would say we need to have a strong strategy on the new business. And again, there are obviously lots of travelers that have been in Europe, and we need to make sure that they come back. And again, maybe now they were a couple and now have a family. So it's a very interesting segment that we should discuss in terms of strategy of Brand Europe.
Okay, great. Well, we've got quite effectively to brand this part of the afternoon, and it's tempting to return to the question of, on the basis of research or feeling or experience, in a sense, what something as big and at one level similar and yet complex as Europe would use as its brand. I mean, what is it, took the EU some time to choose a sort of national anthem. Well, wasn't really a national anthem, was it? But an anthem. So what would we look for in a Europe brand? Because this is designed to sell a large number of different countries in a relatively simple way, which makes sense given the underlying reality. Would you like to ever go first?
Sure. I think it's the same challenge, frankly, that Brand USA has, because you're trying to market a very diverse set of experiences, but one yet that hopefully to the world are still very evocative and provocative. I look over Chris's shoulder to this banner here that says, that is the Brand Europe, and that's very similar, frankly, to what we do. So I think as a destination, Europe can be easily put together, but in terms of product development, it is going to be iconic images or places that are going to be the hook. So in terms of branding and promotion, it is often the fact that you do have to lead, either depending on the market you're serving, with either an iconic place or a very evocative image. So a lot of our brochures will have things like the Tuscan countryside, or that hidden door that's open, or that side street at St. Paul de Vence, or something like that, that you just want to sort of be compelled to go to. So you do have to use the individual destinations to, the locations to pull and support Brand Europe. But I do think that those kinds of messages shown in a continuum become a stronger sell than if you would say put that up there with every type of experience you could have in Europe. I mean, I do think there's an opportunity for the tourism boards to work together to really strongly promote the whole destination. And again, I don't see river on anyone's radar screen, and it's really unfortunate because that is where a significant amount of our growth is coming from, and where we see it coming from. And it does open up parts to Europe that were previously not on the American radar screen.
Can I just add on the river thing? Yeah. Surprisingly, the millennials group is represented. 51% of them say they're considering a cruise. 51. One wouldn't necessarily think of millennials as taking family cruises in Europe.
I will tell
but
you,
they are driving the market.
As we talk about our future planning, combining the growth and the boom in family travel with the growth and the boom of river cruising, we already have a number of very successful programs that are completely sold out already for next year. Right. That will continue to.
I think I know where I'm going to buy some shares at the end of
buy a boat, not some shares.
Buy a boat, yes. Sorry. I mean, on the brand, just though to challenge you for a minute, Jennifer, I mean, the United States as a brand, I mean, you say it's a big, complex place, and it is a big and complex place, but most people here will have they'll have a series of ideas in their mind about images of America, any one of which would conjure up America.
Hopefully not Donald Trump.
Not Donald Trump, no. Well, not yet, anyway. But leaving that to one side, I mean, you did yourself a series of images. Well, you mentioned, a series of images. Is there any, or is it more complex with Europe? You've got to have a series of things to create a brand. I
totally agree. First, the problem, part of the problem is the idiosyncrasies of Europe as Europe, in that it's however many 30 different languages, regions, cultures, time zones. It's very complex. It's not like the United States of America. You can't really talk about the United States, or you can as states joining together. But I think at the end of the day, they will.
I can think of
individual
images that conjure up the United States. Mm-hmm. Now, can we come up with an image that would conjure up Europe as opposed to Italy or France?
But the rest of Europe would fight about it.
That's the point.
Yes.
So that's the point.
You have
it's
that.
More complicated.
Can I just say that I think for me the ideal future of this would be, as you're saying, iconic images and experiences matching the two, and it's iconic image or experiences in the context of an iconic image.
Right.
So we have to go a little bit deeper than just the Eiffel Tower and Big Ben, and also as part of the regional spread idea, we have to go slightly beyond those. Obviously, we can use those as hooks. Once people here say, okay, well, this is while you're in France seeing Big Ben, why don't you go to the Alps or to Toulouse or whatever? Yeah. That was just one area. And there, just to say, as far as you were saying, how do you brand this together? I know the colleagues from ETC have been putting a lot of research, a lot of effort into doing that really for the first time in Europe. So ETC as an organization might have been founded in 1948, but I think it's in the last 5 or 6 years, really, that it's starting to work as an entity because of the socio-political context of Europe. And what they've done, which I think is right, is to take those iconic images, keep the national identities of each country, because you're not going to get Maison de la France or whatever it's now called, or Visit Britain, Atout de France, or Visit Britain to stop being themselves and doing their own marketing. But they can support it generically if they agree on certain series of common experiences. And what ETC is doing, I think quite rightly, is saying, okay, Europe is so varied, let's take it the other way around. Let's say, how do we want to promote Europe? Let's say, what does the American, Chinese, Russian traveler want in Europe?
Yeah.
Then go and look for it in Europe, package it up and present it to them. Present it to them digitally, which is the way things are going nowadays.
Okay,
I
Luca,
think that's working.
do you want to add anything to the brand or related issues before I throw it out?
Yeah, of course. No, I do agree that obviously, so brand Europe can definitely have the opportunity to market themselves in the right way. However, we need to make sure that we don't do the mistake that maybe US was doing ages ago, that to consider Europe as the same thing. So it's important to every strategy that starts with the consumer, most of the time is successful. So what we need to consider is that the US is one of the biggest travel market in the world. So it's very diverse. So even talking about the demographic, the millennials in New York are completely different than the millennials in California, for example, or in Texas. So I think that before, like when we start to talk about the branding Europe, we need to have three main variables that we always need to take into consideration. One, accessibility. I mean, direct flights make much easier the experience of Europe. Then the second is also the growing population. So US is changing a little bit. Like, for example, lots of cities in California and Texas are growing much faster than the East. So that could be an interesting area. And then also the share of valid passports. There are some states that have a higher share of passports and other less. So considering those three variables helps to understand how to brand Europe. And because it's such a big market, if you use Rome, okay, who told you that they will go to Rome? You need to trigger the idea of Europe. And then there is the planning stage, there is research, there is I need to check with my wife, I need to show. So what I'm saying is it's not about choosing necessarily one picture that will need to compete with another one. What we need to make sure that we send the right message to the right consumer. And this is what brand Europe should think about.
Can I underscore 2 points,
go.
Chris, that you both mentioned? I think your point about segmentation is right on, and it is such a diverse clientele, even within, as you mentioned, one specific demographic age group, right? So the ability to understand what those different segments' needs are, and to your point, Chris, being able to market them digitally and personalize those in a way, because we have those tools and technology now, is really the way to go. So it's not a one-size-fits-all strategy. And that's always a challenge of any kind of group or consortia or industry branding. But now we've got better tools and technology and understanding and data to be able to mine that opportunity, I think, more deeply.
Internet algorithms allow you to target almost anything on anybody, don't they? I know this from the brilliant ways they target, make you buy money. All right, audience, time for you. Yes, question at the front.
Well, I don't really know where to start. First of all, my name is João Cochran. I'm
Can we just wait for the microphone, just for the people at the back, if nobody else, thanks.
So my name is João Cochran, and I'm the head of the National Tourist Office of Portugal. I don't know where to start because I have a few things to say which are more or less black and white, which is normally not a very good way of using these debates. At least will stir up the discussion. First, there will never be such a thing as a brand Europe.
Right, they can stop there.
And there is also no...
Discuss.
The good news is there is no need for such a thing as a brand Europe.
All right.
Secondly, I'm very happy that this is the first panel, should have been all of the panels, in which the consumer was mentioned at least 3 times. So we were talking supply, supply, supply all afternoon, and for the first time we're talking demand. If we don't know what people are looking for, it's very difficult to give them what they want. And thirdly, and because we are in the USA panel, to treat the USA market as an homogeneous reality is absolute madness, absolute madness. Just to give you an idea, talking to you, Jennifer, there is one single river cruise company in my country which transports every year over 140,000 Americans. And we are non-existent as a market share country as far as Americans are concerned. And I dare you to find a company, a single company in all of Europe that transports as many Americans as that single company does. Why is this important? Because nobody told this company that there was a segment or a strategy or a brand Europe related to waterways, if there ever will be one. He found it out. So what we must do, and I'm a staunch believer in this, that it's not a question of a top-down policy, establishing huge ideas to then trickle down into products and all that, is to provide the information and the freedom to actual companies, actual entrepreneurs, actual people on the ground. They will find their sources of success. They'll adapt their offer to the actual demand that they'll find. Many of them will fail. Many of them will succeed. And it's the sum of all these individual decisions, these individual successes will make up the tourist industry and will make up what many people like to call brand Europe, but it's nothing more than an accumulated perception of a destination. When people say, I'm going to Europe, do you think they really mean the 38 countries of Europe that they picture in their mind? They don't. It's a matter of speaking. It's almost like a shortcut. It's a facilitating element. It's a place they call Europe, something in their mind. In that respect, big difference what you do to the US. They have a single political power. It's very helpful, not just because of the discussions, Chris. It's because they actually can do things on a federal level, affecting all 50 states, which you can't do in Europe, not even affecting the 28 European Union states, let alone the others. And secondly, they have this wonderful thing called pop culture. For decades, every single one of you, when you were saying everybody can conjure up one image of the states that represents something, it's because we have it in our minds since forever. For TV, movies, music, whatever. It's something similar that happens with the UK, but UK is just one of the many destinations in Europe. So you have that unity. You can show the Grand Canyon and people will think of New York, which is amazing, but it's the way it works. Okay? Somewhere the association is there. So this is just to say, we shouldn't sit and discuss these things as if it's possible to sort of devise and design a top-down thing and then call it brand Europe. We should create the conditions, set people free, let them imagine, let them risk, give them some financing if need be, leave them room, regulate if they go off the top, but just then, okay? And I'm sure great things will come, and we'll be looking at aggregate figures of increasing market share of Europe. But only then. Don't try and design before you know what's going to work, okay?
Okay,
it's just
very
one
good.
more
Okay, thank you very much. All right. We'll take that as a contribution. I'm not going to ask take that as a contribution.
We'll change places.
Thank you for that. That's very, no, I mean that as a compliment.
I would like to add,
Oh,
before
right,
you
go on.
opened to questions, I was just about to add to something that Jennifer was saying about river cruises, I think it was specifically. Saying that we are speaking, and one of the reasons I am pleased is that we've brought this down a little bit to a lot of the audience who are from enterprise and from individual companies. The same consumer-focused approach with research, doesn't have to be expensive research, but thinking about your strategy before. Digital marketing in the US is very different to digital marketing as we know it in Europe. Ways and tools and things are there. That same approach and strategy should be applied to an individual hotelier or tourism product here in Europe. And I think when we're speaking, obviously ETC has a congealing effect and setting an example, but I think even ETC wouldn't want to brand Europe as a continent. I think.
Can I just say,
Go on.
Very quickly.
No.
I agree. I mean, the majority of US travelers will visit one country. So that's a fact. So obviously we're not necessarily...
When they come back home, they say, I've been to Europe.
Well, they discuss, been to Europe, and maybe they can say something about, obviously, Portugal, if they've been to Portugal. But the point is that I think the power of brand Europe is about the retention, to make sure that we give a reason to come back. Because sometimes if you compete across all different countries, then say, well, let me go to South America. So that's where, because if they're coming back, so I do agree that the new business is not coming thanks necessarily, but to the brand Europe. But it's really important for the retention and hey, you've been to Portugal, but you know that if you like this kind of holiday, that's what you can do somewhere else. So that's where I feel the brand USA can help all the countries possibly for the repeaters.
Okay, we'll carry this one out on this great point, carry it on over a drink quite soon because we're going to have to move quite soon. One more question or comment? Down the front here. Front row is
Well, that's
turned.
at least half an hour.
Everybody hold on.
Yes, yes,
It'll have to be short and sharp.
Yeah,
because
very
we've got to
short
be
one.
out.
And I feel obligated to intervene, of course. Eduardo Santander, European Travel Commission. Let's face it. So we're not talking here about Europe losing market share. We've learned that before. We're talking here about losing our competitiveness. And this is caused, unprovoked, and Tom will for sure agree with me, due to the incapacity or the inherent incapacity of Europeans to work together for the same target. And this is what we are facing here. We know the problem, we know the solution, but we don't take it. And you know, my remarks, if I may, today here, and quoting Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, is like lovers. That to be in love doesn't mean to look to each other, but to look in the same direction. And this is what we start to have to do here. And that's the reason we organized this conference today with the private sector, together with the private sector, but we have to learn to be Europeans and to look in the same direction. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. Well, there we are. And one of France's most elegant writers quoted as well, so thank you for that. Word each, just to conclude. What we've heard at the very end here. It'll have to be very short because we need to be done in 2 minutes. Jennifer.
Don't worry.
Stop there, you're ahead.
Keep calm and carry on.
Oh, better said.
Hashtag We Love Europe.
Okay.
It's going back to Jennifer.
That's too
there, I
short.
think.
You're now
So I have now 4 minutes.
You mentioned the drink.
just a minute and a half.
All of it. No, I just say that what we find out is the fact that when you want to brand yourself, I'm talking about brand Europe or even single countries, what really works in the US travelers are emotions. So the message needs to be emotional. We learned also in Expedia the same thing. We brand ourselves in completely different way in Europe and in US. In Europe is travel yourself interesting with something more quirky, a fact that you didn't know about the destination because more you travel, more you're interesting. In US, it's find your spontaneities, find your storybook. So it's much more emotional. So if you want to win on promotion your country or brand Europe, I feel that the emotions needs to be part of it.
Okay, well, I'm just going to say 1 minute's worth more just to end the afternoon. I think we've had a fascinating stimulus to thought brought about by looking at 3 large countries' tourism markets insofar as they affect Europe, but to some extent in both directions. And it's been an important way of trying to think that through because these things do run both ways. I think that Europe is, Europeans are, and I think this is one thing that makes them Europeans, sort of pessimistic by nature, I think, to say that. Certainly the British are. And it is easy to see these numbers, or some of them, as being declined. But actually, what they are, and I think Luca made this point, is that they are growth in a market which is growing faster, which is just, if you're the big dominant player, you will eventually shrink relatively, but not necessarily absolutely. And that, to some extent, is the wider position of Europe in the world. It has been in relative decline as a place, and yet its attributes and its values, and therefore its tourism, continue to be enormously influential, as does the United States, Canada, other countries, Russia, China, here represented. So I think that we should be relatively optimistic at the end of the afternoon. I think we've learned, demand and supply, relative decline, not decline, the need for places to be differentiated and to conjure up experience. I think that's a powerful thought as well. And that the issue of brand is ideally suited for one to carry away from the room and discuss it over a glass of wine or whatever we're going to get next. I'm told that whatever we get next, I have to tell you, this is on the 4th floor. Though, as I said, in this building, it's hard to know where that will be, but it's on the 4th floor. And the lift's outside. Thank you all very much.